Welcome to the Healthspan Collective, the podcast where science and wellness converge. I'm Nicole Doran, and I'm thrilled to have you join us as we dive into the world of regenerative medicine, integrative health, and the latest trends shaping how we live healthier for longer. Hi, everyone. Today I'm joined by one of my favorite people, Dr. Joseph Purita. For those who don't know Dr. Purita, he is an orthopedic surgeon and world-renowned regenerative medicine practitioner, expert, and professor. He has lectured on 6 of the 7 continents over the last 15 years, is the chief medical officer at our wellness center, PUR-FORM, and is the most avid researcher I have ever met. Welcome, Dr. Purita.
Well, thank you. What an introduction. Boy, I tell you, it pays to pay her.
Okay, well, here we are. It's episode number 1 of the Healthspan Collective, and I figured we would kind of go back to the beginning to understand, how did Dr. Purita even get involved in regenerative medicine? Because you're a traditional orthopedic surgeon by trade.
By training, I'm board certified in orthopedic surgery. Did many different operations, hip replacements, knee replacements, arthroscopy, all kinds of sports medicine. But I always kind of liked the unusual, the cutting edge. When I was a resident, I was starting to do a project with my professor, Mark Brown, on Chymopapain injections. Now, you may know Chymopapain as Adolph's meat tenderizer. And what we were doing is we were putting that into a disc to dissolve a herniated disc. And by God, we got great results. Next thing you know, this was kind of released to the general orthopedic community. And then it was basically not doing as well, because when you start releasing it to a community where people don't really know what they're doing, so to speak, the results became poor. But I said to myself, this is something, and I really want to pursue it, but maybe in a different way. So the next thing I got involved with, this is 40-something years ago, was lasers. You know, in those days, people said lasers, that's what they see in the James Bond movie, where they basically are using it to cut through metal. But I said, I bet you lasers would work in a disc. So I got a hold of a company called Coherent Laser, and we started doing laser discectomies, and we had great results. And I was interested in that, but I just didn't want to be narrowed down into just doing back procedures. So I started using lasers, also doing arthroscopy and things like that. And by Lord, it was working very well. And I'm still kind of involved in photomodulation. I just met with some Russian professors this weekend. They were introducing me to a new type of laser that they may want to use in regenerative medicine and joint problems and things like that. So I really like that. But, you know, once I got into private practice, I still had that, fire inside of me that I wanted to do the cutting edge. So I was doing a lot of joint replacements, and I heard about this thing called PRP. What does PRP mean? Platelet-rich plasma. I had no real idea about it. I said, well, let me look at it. And I said, yeah, I think I'll try it. So I said, all right, let's go ahead and make it up. So I would make it up. I'd spray it into the wound, and then put some other stuff called platelet-poor plasma on top of the wound. And lo and behold, I said, these patients are doing better. There's something to this. And I started reading about it and thinking about it. I said, this is kind of the way nature does things. And I said, let me look into this more. And I said, I think this can help maybe cut down some of the surgeries we do. And lo and behold, some of my contemporaries were saying, are you crazy? This is hocus pocus stuff you're doing now, this PRP stuff. I said, no, I think this is going to be something. They basically laughed at me. Said, yeah, okay, fine. And so I started doing PRPs.
And is this in your orthopedic surgery office?
My orthopedic surgery office. My partners were not very happy, but they tolerated it because they knew I was kind of always involved in something unusual, so to speak.
You get bored easy.
Talk about the ADD kid. There you go. That's why I can't read books. I can read articles. I can read 20 articles a day. You give me a fiction book, I'm going to say, shoot me, because I can't do that. That's just the way I am. That's my mantra.
I've seen you read some research books, though.
Oh no, research books.
Like scientific books.
Right. A fiction book, I can't sit down and do it. It's just not me. And I feel kind of bad sometimes. I envy some people that I can see sometimes just, sitting there by a pool or something, just reading a book and just enjoying themselves. I can't do that. I got to be doing something. That's my mantra. So anyway, I started saying PRP. Okay, so I said, what's the next step? Adipose tissue. What is an adipose tissue? I used to think like most physicians, most people, the adipose tissue, your fat tissue, was basically kind of worthless tissue. You didn't want it. But I realized it was a treasure trove of stem cells and other regenerative cells. I said, well, that's something to use. And I said,
And
bone
for
marrow.
those that don't know, what's adipose tissue?
Adipose tissue is your fat tissue.
Right.
Okay, same thing. But again, it's a treasure trove of cells, regenerative cells. And, certain cells in that adipose tissue pretty much stay constant. They don't go away as you age, which is an important aspect of the treatment. And then I said, well, what else is there? Well, what's the best regenerative soup in the body? It's your bone marrow aspirate. Now, what do we mean by bone marrow aspirate? So if we put a little needle through the top of the bone, which is called the cortex, into the kind of spongy part of the bone is basically full of blood and blood components. That's where your blood is made, in your bone marrow.
Right.
But it's a very spectacular regenerative soup, having all kinds of regenerative cells, including stem cells. Remember, stem cells alone aren't the answer. You can put stem cells in a lot of places. They may not do much. They have to work as a symphony with other cells. And that's where I became convinced that you've got to start mixing things together. And I started doing it and just did one little technique after another. And next thing you know, I'm working with a bunch of docs, years later in Brazil. And we're making some protocols, and we've written some papers, and we come up with something called a hybrid bone marrow, which is kind of our baby in that we use some bone marrow that we centrifuge and spin it down, and some that we take right from the bone. And each has its benefits, and we've published a couple of papers on that. So some very interesting things that has kind of taken me on this journey. And again, it was with, slings and arrows, so to speak. But one thing that kind of helped put me on the map was I got a call one day. It was from a company I was working with in Boston called Harvest Technologies. Now, they were very reputable. They were working with Harvard, and they were doing a lot of stuff with PRP. They said, listen, we have a case we'd like you maybe to go do. I said, well, tell me about it. Well, it's a guy who's out of baseball now because he hurt his shoulder and his elbow, and he's not able to play anymore. And there's a guy we know down there who's a cardiologist who's doing a lot of regenerative medicine. And he'd like to treat this guy, but he doesn't really know orthopedics. So I said, you know what? I'll go down on the one condition. Just pay my airfare and my hotel, and I'm more than happy to help out and make sure it's done the right way. Mm-hmm. So I talked to the doctor. We set up a time. Of course, like a lot of things, I go there and I said, all right, here's my reservation. I'm flying into Santo Domingo. He said, okay, no problem. I'll meet you there. So I arrive in Santo Domingo, and I'm looking for his name. His nickname is Chicky, and he's a good friend of mine now. As a matter of fact, I'm going to call him tonight about some things. But I call him up, said, Chicky, I'm here. He says, where are you? You should just, you should see my car, my blue car. I said, Chicky, there's a lot of cars here. He said, where are you? I said, just like I told you, I'm in Santo Domingo. He says, no, you were supposed to go to Santiago. I'm going to myself, Santiago, Chile? How am I going to get there from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic? He says, no, it's the second biggest town in the Dominican Republic. So he gave instructions to the cab driver. 4 hours later,
oh my God,
through thick and thin, I get there, 1 o'clock at night. I said, all right, fine. He says, I'll see you in the morning. So we go in there in the morning. And we do this player, and it's, well known throughout all public circles, so I can mention his name. His name is Bartolo Colon.
Oh.
So Bartolo was out of baseball.
Little unknown baseball player, right?
So I said, all right, let's do this. Let's go ahead and we'll get, we'll do some bone marrow, we'll do some fat, and we'll do some PRP in them. So, okay, fine. So we're doing them in the OR, which I said, all right, if you want to do them in the OR, we can. And so... I showed them how to do the fat. We did that. Next thing you know, they were all set to do the bone marrow. I said, all right, fine. And they're trying to put this needle in by hand. I said, that's not going to work, boys. And they said, well, what do you want? I said, give me un mateo. And that's my Spanish for a hammer. They're looking at me like I was nuts. I said, just watch. Boom, boom, boom. Tapped it in, got the bone marrow, and that's it. So then we treated his shoulder and treated his elbow. And I said to him, at the end of the day, I said, well, look, good luck to you. I said, I grew up in New York, and I'm a Yankees fan. He says, oh, we don't like the Yankees around here. I said, well, fine. But look, I hope you can make it. I kind of had my doubts because he was throwing, for an average person, that was a tremendous speed, but he can throw about 75 miles an hour. Next thing you know, a couple months later, he's signing a contract with the Yankees, of all things, and he's throwing in the 90s. And I said, great. Somehow or other, the word got out. Because, you have patient confidentiality, et cetera. And I got a call from a reporter for the New York Times.
Right.
And he says, listen, I want to talk to you. I said, well, what are you talking about? He says, doctor, we already know what's going on. So you can either just have me write a story or you can tell me what really happened. I said, okay. I said, but I have to get the okay from Bartolo and his agent. Turns out his agent is a patient of mine.
Oh.
So lo and behold, I called him up. I said, hey, so-and-so, they want to do this thing. And I think it's probably better that we at least tell them what really happened rather than, some crazy story. He says, okay, I'll talk to Bartolo. He said, Bartolo gives you his blessing. I said, okay, fine. So we did that. And this made all kinds of headlines everywhere and kind of put us on the map.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden guys that were making fun of me and this is hocus pocus. Hey, can we come maybe and watch a couple of cases? Can we come train with you? And then it just kind of snowballed, and I never kind of looked back, just kept going, and I'm still doing that today. We're looking to do new things in our office. We're always involved in the cutting edge of the cutting edge because that's my mantra, and that's what I like, and that keeps me going, keeps me young. I mean, I do some of my biological tests here and there, and they're spectacular, and I hope they stay that way for years to come.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the world of regenerative medicine, the industry is growing a lot. I think it's becoming a little bit more accepted by the medical community, but there's still a long ways to go, wouldn't you say?
Still a long ways to go. And here's where another thing that I would tell people. I said, look, in orthopedics, cardiology, pulmonology, whatever, you're probably never going to make a difference. You're not going to go write some paper that's going to be, oh my God, that's really something. But in the field of regenerative medicine, the guy out there, because we're on such a, on the ground level, you might actually make a difference, make something that's going to really make a difference for treating patients and things like that. The other thing is we're still in such a beginning stage that you have to kind of be an expert in many different fields, which was kind of hard for me to initially, fathom because, initially I was, I left medical school. Okay, now I'm going to just do orthopedics the rest of my life. All of a sudden now I'm still looking at things, okay, well, how can we make this better? How can that patient's heart be made better? So I had to go back to my basics and kind of learn some of my medical stuff again and figure these things out and figure out how can we make this better. So I think eventually you're going to see regenerative medicine is going to start shooting off again into various specialties. But right now it's kind of, you have to kind of learn all these different things.
Yeah. Well, it's all intertwined and it kind of, So first I want to kind of take it back to the timeline a little bit. So what year was it when you were treating Bartolo? Do you know?
I mean, I could go look. I got an article in my, it was probably around 2008, something like that, 2010, something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then at that time, so back in the U.S., were you still practicing out of your orthopedic office?
I was still doing orthopedics, surgery, and I was still doing regenerative medicine. I was doing the both of them.
But out of the same office, right?
At the same office. I mean, I had a little office that I was doing regenerative medicine that was just a fluoroscope and a little 3-seat waiting area, and that was about it.
Right. And then when did you kind of split the regenerative medicine piece off and start practicing out of the two separate offices?
Well, then I said to myself, I said, I think I need to expand a little bit. And so I told my partners, because luckily, again, they thought this was going to be nothing that was going to work out. So I said, look, I just want to have an option in our contract that if I want to take these cases out of the office, I can without any penalty. So yeah, sure, that's you do whatever you want, fine. Little did they know it was going to come back and bite them, because that's what I did. But I still continued to work there doing orthopedics.
Right.
But not, regular. I mean, I was just doing orthopedics 2 half days a week until last month.
Right.
And now I'm fully devoted to PUR-FORM and, making PUR-FORM even better.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you were able to split off into your regenerative medicine office. I think the first name was Stem Cell Centers of America. Is that
Stem
correct?
Cell Centers of America, Institute of Regenerative Medicine, things like that.
Yep. And then I think it was in 2020, then we came in and turned the Institute of Regenerative Medicine into, or we started to concept the idea of PUR-FORM.
Interestingly, so how did it come about? Well, I had 2 patients of mine who approached me and said, hey, why don't we maybe consider making a world-class facility? I said, you're the guys, if I'm going to do anything with, you're the guys I want to do it. Because I had some other partners, won't mention any names, that were not the best of people as far as my concerns were concerned. But my partners now couldn't ask for anybody better.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to make this, well, not going to. They already made it a world-class center. People come here and they said, there's nothing like this around, and absolutely the case.
Yeah. And people, I mean, To toot your horn a little bit, people travel from all over the world.
Yeah, I've seen people from a lot of different places. We had all kinds of places. Yeah.
And when did you start lecturing in regenerative medicine?
About the same time. I would never thought of myself initially going into academics, so to speak. And all of a sudden somebody said, a friend of mine, and I can mention his name, he's one of the world's experts in something called telomeres.
Okay.
His name is Bill Andrews. Bill said, hey, why don't you go and give a lecture down in Brazil? I said, Brazil? That's interesting. I've never been there. Okay. So I went and gave a lecture. When I look at the lecture today, I said, wow, that's kind of primitive. But I said, but at the time, that was kind of the cutting edge science.
Right.
So I did that, and then people liked it. And then I've gotten invitations all over the place. And if you look at my CV, I don't know. I've lectured at, every continent except Antarctica. And it's been a very exciting thing. I mean, I do some crazy things sometimes. I never forget sometimes I would leave on a Thursday morning. I'd fly from Lauderdale to Dallas. Then I'd fly from Dallas to Shanghai. Mm-hmm. I'd get there Friday afternoon. I'd give a lecture Saturday. Then next thing you know, I'm leaving Saturday night. I'd be back in my office Monday.
Yeah, you're a rock star when it comes to the travel.
Doesn't bother me. I have some tricks. I mean, I can say what some of my tricks are. I mean, I use something called a little laser wristwatch. It doesn't tell time, but it basically does photomodulation to my circulatory system. And I take something called DO40. Now, you may have seen me on TV, the Super Beats commercial, because I'm on their scientific board. Well, DO40 is from the same company. It's a nitric oxide stimulator. Now, anecdotally, because we don't have the complete 100% science, it seems to really help with jet lag.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I've traveled with Dr. Purita a couple times, and he makes sure we take our DO40 before, during, and after the flight. And I can attest it makes a world of difference.
Bella, she went on a trip with a bunch of friends. They went to Croatia or something. They were all dead, and Bella's over there all ready to go when they got there. So it does work.
Yeah, no, it works really well. So you mentioned something that I wanted to get into a little bit more, and that's the science. I think something that I know your now business partners have always really admired and respected about you, especially compared to some, and we want to call them competitors, but some other practitioners in the regenerative medicine space. You have always made medical decisions and directions rooted in the science. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, and then also kind of give us a breakdown when we're talking about stem cell therapy or regenerative medicine, especially the way that you practice it. How does that work? What are stem cells?
That's a topic of controversy. I mean, stem cells, if you look at the godfather of the stem cell world, Dr. Arnie Kaplan, rest his soul, he passed away about a year or so ago. He said, guys, I named mesenchymal stem cells, but I'm not so sure I'm correct about it. I'm not going to call them necessarily stem cells. I call them medicinal signaling cells. Uh-huh. Now, what does that mean in everyday English? So what Dr. Ernie said, basically, Dr. Kaplan, he said, these cells, what they do is they get put into an area and they send out signals to make other cells go to that area and do their job. He says sometimes, yes, they can help reproduce things and increase the tissue, but basically they're medicinal signaling cells. They can give the area signals to what to do. So I liken those cells to a Navy SEAL.
Okay.
They get put in a very hostile area, probably not going to necessarily survive, but their job is to kind of maybe help secure that area so the rest of the forces can come in and do the job. Okay. And I think that's and I've had a couple of slides on my lectures where I show a slide of some Navy SEALs kind of in hiding, so to speak. You can't really see them. I mean, they say there's 6 SEALs here. I can only count 3 of them, but they're there. But they can do the job. So that's why I like them. And then there's other cells in your body called hematopoietic. They're kind of like the Army guys. There's a lot of them, and they can do the job also. So that's one thing that I like about that. Now, I have a slide, and I think that this is probably a very profound saying, and it really can kind of sum up regenerative medicine. Cells, not doctors, heal patients. And you smiling because you've heard that many times. And that's so true. I mean, when all is said and done, you can have a hip replacement, a heart transplant, whatever. Ultimately, the cells have to do the final healing of that area, or it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. So cells heal. Now, another thing that I have, another one that you've heard a lot of, I want people to think of their organs and their cells as the computer hardware, and the pathways in the body are the computer software. Mm-hmm. And I had an aha moment many years ago when I was looking at stem cell aging pathways.
Okay.
And I started saying, wow, okay, so if that cell can stimulate this pathway, it's going to do this. And then I realized, I said, these pathways, there's a lot of them, but there's just a couple of major ones. Once you start learning those pathways, then you know how to start manipulating things.
Right.
And one thing falls into another and falls into another. And basically most everything we do here involves trying to manipulate the pathways in your body. And, like a computer, when your computer's not working so well, what do? You want to reboot it. And we're attempting to reboot some of these pathways. As we age, these pathways may get turned off for some other reason or other. There's a field called epigenetics. Epigenetics is a field where genes either get turned on or get turned off. As you age, certain genes get turned on, certain genes get turned off. Our job is to kind of figure out where these genes are and how to turn them on or turn them off. And that can make the difference between health and disability and things like that. So
yeah,
a lot of different things.
Yeah. Something I've always loved about your saying cells, not doctors, heal patients is the fact that in regenerative medicine, something I've always been drawn to, and, it was a big reason I wanted to work with you to begin with, is the fact that when you do these procedures, the patient's bodies really do heal in a way that you really don't see in traditional medicine. You're taking cells from one area of the body, minimally manipulating them and then putting them in another area of the body. And there's regeneration. You have, patients come back, and I've heard, countless patients at this point say, Doc, it's a miracle. What did you, what is this? And why doesn't everybody know about it? Like, now, sounds crazy to some people.
I have to be honest. We don't cure things. We're not curing osteoarthritis. I mean, if you have an arthritic joint, you're still going to have some arthritis in there. But we can hopefully make it better.
Right.
And another thing I tell patients, it's a very important aspect of what we do. It changes the chemistry of the joint on a long-term basis. And that's so important because, remember, these stem cells, as Dr. Kaplan was saying, they're like little biochemical factories. They can produce certain growth factors that can be very long-lasting, and they can basically get rid of the inflammation. It's almost like you're giving a cortisone injection, except the problem with cortisone, it's given at a price because it can have a lot of basically bad side effects.
Right.
And can be bad for the joint, etc. Whereas these things are basically, we're mimicking how nature heals. Sometimes nature can't quite get these cells to where they need to be. Our job is to get them there. Now, one of the things I like about the orthopedic aspect of this is it's much easier for me to get cells where they need to be because I can just do it by injection and keep them there. Whereas if you're doing something in the heart, it's much more difficult, but there's still things that can be done.
Okay. So say somebody, for whatever reason, they can't come to you, Dr. Purita, at PUR-FORM in Boca. Are there certain things that you would recommend somebody look for in a regenerative medicine practitioner to kind of be able to delineate somebody who really knows what they're doing and talking about as opposed to someone who doesn't?
Well, one of the things I always tell people, if the doctor you're going to go see if he's given lectures. Because when a doctor's given lectures to his peers, that means he's held in somewhat of an esteem.
Yeah.
Okay. If a guy hasn't done that or something, then I'm always a little skeptical. You never know, though. Look, there's younger guys out there, and yeah, maybe they haven't lectured yet, but that's one kind of clue. And see if they're stressing science. If they're going to tell you they're going to cure you, then that's a person I probably wouldn't recommend you see because they're not being honest with you.
Right.
Okay. There's no guarantees. I can guarantee you 3 things in life. You're going to die someday, pay taxes, and see change in your life. And that's it. But we think we have a pretty good way of getting you better. But you look at this, you look at their website and see what they say and just kind of go from there. It's hard sometimes to judge it, though.
Yeah. I feel like something that you do a decent job, though, especially, when you and I are walking around conferences and we're meeting, people in our industry, something you do, which always makes me laugh, is you kind of quiz the people that we talk to see what they know. And I think that's something that, obviously a layperson doesn't have all the knowledge that you have, but I think something to look out for is, does this practitioner know the science? Can they explain to you the science of how what they're doing works?
Right.
Wouldn't you say?
That's such a good point. If they can't explain it to you, that means they don't understand it themselves.
Right.
And if you don't understand what you're doing, then you're basically just a technician. And Do you want a technician taking care of you, or do you want a doctor taking care of you? It's
Right.
simple as that, I mean, in some ways, I'm prejudiced towards being an MD.
Right. But I've also heard you say, of course, it's a nice blanket statement to say an MD, has gone through more training and maybe more credible on some fronts. But I've also seen you interact with a lot of PAs and other practitioners who aren't MDs who you really respect because
No,
they know their
absolutely.
stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on the person, and how much they want to learn. I mean, I've taught a lot of, non-MD people and MD-DOs. Even I do a lot of work with naturopaths and things like that. So, as a matter of fact, one naturopath who's very well known in the country, I was the one that taught him bone marrow. So I don't I'd rather teach somebody the right way. I don't care what their field of learning was, but I want to teach it the right way so they continue it on, because it's a reflection on everyone if they do it the wrong way.
Right. I agree. Rising tides raise all ships. Is that the saying?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of back to the journey of Dr. Purita and your regenerative medicine career. So when you started your original regenerative medicine office, were you just offering orthopedic procedures?
I was just doing orthopedic procedures, and then the next journey comes along. So I had a friend of mine in the Dominican Republic again call me down to help treat some baseball players.
Okay.
But we were going to do something called EBO2, which I said, what the heck is that? And he was telling me, I said, extracorporeal blood ozonation and oxygenation. So I said, extracorporeal, okay, outside the body, blood, okay, ozonation and oxygenation. So I went down and I looked at this and I said, what, are you kidding me? I said, you probably have to be a cardiothoracic surgeon to do this. But then I said, well, wait a minute, let me look at this. I said, well, that's not too complicated. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. I said, but ozone was kind of a topic didn't know much about. Okay, I said, but you know what? I've heard about the Russians using a lot. And, interesting, Russia, when it was the Soviets, they really did a lot of stuff in regenerative medicine. They really were the forefront of regenerative medicine. Believe it or not. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. If you go back, way back when, you had a little country called East Germany.
Okay.
East Germany was very small, maybe a quarter the size of Florida. Yet, when they did the Olympics, they would always be at the forefront. They'd always be like it would be Russia, United States, East Germany. Why? Because they really looked at the physiology of things. They would have athletes train at altitude, except in bunkers, under the ground.
Wow.
Things like that. They're the ones that taught us about intermittent hypoxia therapy, peptides, things like that. So
really?
So I really learned a lot from them. So I said, well, let me look at this. I said, well, now ozone. Wow, yeah, okay, there's some interesting things. Triple oxygen. So I started, I kind of went down there, looked at this, and I said, okay. So I went a few times. I said, I think this is a technology we should bring to the United States. So we brought it to the United States, and we started treating patients. And we started doing some IVs at the same time.
Right.
Because I started looking at the IV. Now, I said, the next thing I said, now I'm learning the science more. I said, I think, because I'm saying to myself, if we're taking blood from one vein and it's going in this machine to ozonate the blood, and remember, no ozone ever enters the body, and then it goes back to another vein. I said, that's the superhighway of the immune system. And I know light therapy really makes a big difference. So here it is. I'm getting involved with doing some 3D printing of these primitive little chambers that we had. And so what I would do is I'd put some mirrors inside of them to reflect light. And we had a little light strip, and we made a very primitive photo activation device. But it seemed to be working. So then I don't remember exactly what happened, but I met this gentleman. I consider him a genius. His name is Gene, and he helped build the hemolumen.
Okay.
The hemolumen is a machine where it subjects blood going through a trivet to 6 different color lights. And I said, I'd love to put that with EBO2. And we married the two together.
Yeah.
And then I've become very good friends with these guys, and now I'm kind of their medical director, so to speak. When they have a medical question, they call me. And I said, well, Gene, I think we need to move to the next step, and that's to probably go ahead and pulse this light. He says, good idea. So that's what we've done. We pulsed it. And that's, another interesting thing that we did. And taking it one step further, one thing that we do that almost no one does here is I invented this little light with Gene called the Pure Light, and we use that for our cell therapies. So in other words, any PRP or fat or bone marrow aspirate or something, we put in this little light to photoactivate it, or photobiomodulate it, excuse me. So then one day I was kind of bored and I said, why can't we maybe do this to some IV compounds? So we now found a few IV compounds that we can photoactivate, and lo and behold, when it comes to things like NAD, it can cut the time down by 60-70% of how long it takes the patient to take it.
Right, meaning they can tolerate it better.
Much better.
And they're absorbing it.
So that was another thing. So there's always little things, and now I'm looking to do the next thing I think we're going to really do some interesting stuff with is something called therapeutic plasmapheresis, where we're going to basically take some plasma from the patient, throw it away, and replace it with some interesting things, including something called albumin.
Which has like a super anti-inflammatory effect, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Very good for anti-aging. And we may even take it one step further. We're looking into it now. We haven't made any firm thing yet, but we might say, well, let's get a little plasma bank where we'll have patients that are 18 to 25-year-old. They'll basically donate a liter of plasma, and we'll give that to an older person.
Interesting.
That's a very interesting concept, but we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Excited to see what we do on that front. But for now, we really like, a lot of our patients are big fans of EVO2. I'd say that's one of the most popular treatments we do here at PUR-FORM.
Absolutely.
And along with V cells and IVs, and I would love to do kind of deep dives in other shorter episodes to kind of just get into the details for someone to understand how each of these procedures work. But kind of back to the note on inflammation, I always find something that you talk about to be super interesting, the concept of inflammaging.
Inflammaging. I believe that was a term that came, I think, somewhere in the 2017, 2018, I think was an article in Time magazine. So what is inflammaging? Okay. Well, inflammation causes aging. Aging causes inflammation. Hence, you get the two guys together, you have inflammaging. And basically, we're pretty certain now, I mean, there's very good, strong science that if we can cut down inflammation, we can cut down aging. And that's the real secret here. We can't, at least we can't back it yet. We can slow it down, though. But eventually, I think we'll be able to. I shouldn't say that. We actually do cause some reverse aging. When you look at telomeres, which are the ends of the DNA, we actually can do some procedures that can make them longer. And that's thought to be, reversing aging. But, one thing I always say, and some people may not agree with me, but I think it's correct. When you look at aging, it's a mosaic. So sometimes I go to these meetings where I'm giving a talk and somebody goes over and says, well, I'm Dr. So-and-so and my regular age is 60, but my biologic age is 50. What does that mean? Just because one test is that way doesn't mean anything. It's a whole mosaic of different things. Now, the better these markers are or less aging, the better you are. But that doesn't mean your biological age is such and such.
Right. Okay. So that kind of brings me to my next question, which is, what is the Dr. Purita recipe or daily routine to combat inflammaging?
Okay.
Because I have one note for the audience. Since I've known you, it's been almost 5 years now. I swear you're aging in reverse. You look younger today than I first met you. Okay,
so what do? I have no secrets. You can go look at the website and see some of the blogs. So my day starts around 4 something. I get up and I read. Okay. I read articles, though. I just peruse them. Okay, that's a good article to maybe a good article to put on LinkedIn.
How do you find your articles? You have Google alerts.
I have, right? I basically, I put a whole bunch of topics in mitophagy, mitochondria, senescent cells, you name it. I look at it, and then I just peruse these things. So then that's part one. Then part two, around, I got it down to the minute almost, 4:45 or so, I leave my home. Like I left the house this morning, it was raining. I said, so what? Okay. And I walk about 4 miles. Okay. Nice brisk walk. Come back. Then I read a little bit more. Then I get on my elliptical, but I cheat then because I watch some TV. So I'm kind of watching The Sopranos again, one of my favorite shows. And I do my elliptical for about 25, 30 minutes, get my heart rate up to in the 140s. Then I decide to go take a little swim, and then I get to my office. Now, that is 7 days a week. There's no rest for the weary. I do exercise every day. Somebody asked me, I was at another meeting, I was lecturing once, and somebody asked me, they were doing an interview. RADFest is basically the meeting that is revolution against aging and death. So they said, what's the best medicine you can give someone? I said, exercise. There's nothing better as far as I'm concerned. Now, number 2, I take a handful of supplements 5 days a week. Okay. And you can find them on our website. I think my 12 go-to supplements. You know, some of them are NAD precursors, TMG, trimethylglycine, a whole bunch of things for different pathways. And I kind of spell it out in that article. I do intermittent fasting 5 days a week. You know, I usually go around 18 hours. Now, today I had to do a demonstration with EBO2, which we know can lower your blood sugar. So I said, fine. So I kind of cheated, and it was pretty good, actually. It was chocolate and peanut butter we have in our refrigerator here.
Oh, yeah.
About 220 calories. I said, all right, fine. But so I do that. And then, you know, I try and stay mentally alert all the time. And, you know, I go to bed around 10:30, 11 o'clock, depends what's on. I don't need that much sleep, luckily. But I get a good night's sleep when I go to sleep, I go to sleep.
Okay. So you're intermittent fasting for 18 hours of the day. Let's go back to your supplements for a minute. I know, you know, it's a lot to kind of list them all out. I think, like you said, there's 12 of them. We do have an Amazon
probably
list
more. I mean, there's 12 of them. I mean, there's urolithin A. Now, what's urolithin A for? Urolithin A is interesting. It's kind of a derivative in a way of pomegranate, but you don't get it from eating pomegranate alone. It's something that your gut produces also from the pomegranate, but most people cannot produce it. So urolithin A does something called mitophagy. Now, what is mitophagy? Well, it's kind of the process where your body can analyze a mitochondria, and if that mitochondria is not working that well, it can get rid of it and can use some of its parts. But if it can be fixed, it can kind of fix it. Now, when all is said and done, and I haven't mentioned this before in our little talk today, but I'm going to mention it now, most of our procedures that we do here ultimately are trying to get your mitochondria healthier. When all is said and done, most diseases, I think, of aging, et cetera, are when your mitochondria are failing you. Most of the neurodegenerative diseases, the diseases up in your head, so to speak, are because your mitochondria are failing you. You know, what 2 organs in your body have more mitochondria than anything else? Your heart and your brain. And so that's what your supplements want to target, your brain and your heart. Okay. So what are other ones that I take? Curcumin, because that stimulates a pathway that reduces inflammation in my body. Turmeric, another name for it. N-acetylcysteine, that's kind of a precursor of some things, including glutathione. I take, another important fact. We want to make sure we get our blood glucose level low. Okay. That's really a key to anti-aging and well-being. Now, a couple of years ago, I was taking metformin, which many people may know it as a diabetes medicine. Now, I wasn't taking it for diabetes. I was taking it for anti-aging, anti-cancer.
Right.
But now I feel there's a better product out there called berberine. Why I like berberine better is because metformin sometimes can nullify some of the effects of exercise. Berberine does not. So I think that's a better alternative. Now, I also take something called Synsulin, which is a combination of cinnamon and chromium, again, to really keep my blood glucose low. And the lower it is, essentially, the better. I mean, obviously, if you get too low, it's detrimental to you. A couple of other things I take there. Alpha-lipoic acid, CoQ10, another coenzyme. And again, like I say, I take not NAD. You can't really take NAD by mouth, but I take an NAD precursor. NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. What is it really in English? It's a coenzyme that all cells need to produce ATP, which is the body's energy currency.
Right.
So important, okay? Now, as we age, every 20 years of life, our NAD levels goes down 50%. So you need to really keep that level up because it's not only used to just produce energy, it's used to basically repair DNA damage and things like that.
Yeah. I feel like that taking an NAD precursor, I hear you attest a lot to, I think, the lack of aging of the brain that you feel. You know, wouldn't you say you still feel extremely mentally alert?
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
You have no real need or want to slow down.
No, to me, that's just going to make me sick. Something. Right. I like being with young people. It keeps me younger and it keeps my brain going, and that's what I want.
Yeah. And then back to, so you said you intermittent fast for 18 hours of the day. Are you doing a coffee in the morning? Do you drink caffeine?
The only time I drink I drink caffeine, but the only time I drink coffee is when I do something called NAD, intravenously. Because a little crazy thing that we discovered is, and we don't mind telling you this, if you drink coffee while you're doing NAD, it makes the NAD a lot easier to take. But as far as caffeine, no, I never take caffeine other than iced tea. Iced tea is my go-to drink usually.
You drink like an iced green tea, right?
Doesn't have to be green tea. I mean, green tea is good for you, but sometimes, my wife Lori will make, some blueberry tea or something like that, and that's fine.
Okay. And then when you're breaking your fast, what are you breaking it with? What do you typically eat in a day?
It depends. I mean, I'll go home. I may eat a little mozzarella cheese. Cheeses, I think, are something that we have gotten a bad rap, and I think they're pretty good. I just wrote a little article recently. We'll have it on our website about how certain cheeses can really help your brain, and it's a very interesting thing. Fermented cheeses, especially like Parmesan and things like that. So that's a good thing. Then I'll eat a regular meal, and I'll cheat some. I'll have some little piece of a cookie or a little ice cream or something like that. But, come around 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, that's it, done. Okay.
And do you typically, if you're not quote unquote cheating, you typically like to eat a little bit lower carb, right?
If possible, yeah. I mean, I'm not really big into the sugar stuff.
Right.
Other than maybe I could say a little ice cream, but I won't drink a Diet Coke I won't drink a Diet Coke for sure. Nor will I drink a regular Coke. I had I hate to admit it, I had some juice today, some apple juice, because I was doing a demonstration.
Procedure, yeah.
And when my nurse measured my blood glucose, it was 81, which is great. But, we did the procedure, which could potentially lower it. So I said, all right, give me some juice. And I reluctantly drank it. But normally I don't. I'm not a big juice fan because it's not good for you. It's really not a healthy thing.
Yeah. No, I think I'd be shocked if I ever saw you drinking a soda or anything like that. Okay, so you mentioned exercise 7 days a week, supplements and intermittent fasting 5 days a week. Do you think there's a benefit in taking a break on the weekends for those?
I do. I mean, most doctors and most people would probably tell you I should take a break for the exercise, but I just I don't feel right if I do that.
Yeah.
Like sometimes if I'm traveling, I've got my watch. I always want to make sure my circles are closed. And if I don't close them, I just feel bad.
Incomplete.
So, that's my little, I don't know, my little whatever. But I exercise 7 days a week. But most people will tell you that's probably too much. You should give your body a little break.
Yeah.
I'd say,
I feel like if you're really straining your body and, you're really fatiguing your muscles, maxing out, lifting weights, that kind of thing, you need a little more recovery time. But I think the way that you exercise it's sustainable.
It's working for me. So
it's the kind of thing that if you lived in an Italian village 100 years ago, you would have gotten that kind of exercise just in your day-to-day.
And I go work in my garden. You see, I'm still an old-fashioned Italian in many ways. I still work in my garden.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about next. So obviously during the week, you do your workout, you come to work, you come home, you spend time with Lori. What do you do on the weekends?
A lot of times I work in my garden. That's kind of a passion of mine. I always was intrigued by plants. Ever since I was a little kid, I used to like to work in a garden. And I have a lot of exotics in my garden, things that shouldn't be growing here, but they still grow here. And that's fun. And then I'll, sometimes then we'll go to the beach and I'll hang out at the beach and just kind of chill out and just let my brain relax.
Love that. Love a little relaxation on the weekends. All right. My last question for you is, what does having a long health span mean to you, Dr. Purita?
Okay. So what is a health span to begin with? We can do things here to hopefully make you live a long time. But if you're going to live a long time, you're going to be living in a wheelchair and not knowing where you are and that's not living. We want you to live a long life, and we want you to really enjoy life and be able to do what you want until almost the very end. That's what we call health span. And that's really what our goal is, to increase your health span and increase your longevity. Just to increase longevity, that's important, yeah, but increasing that health span is the real key. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. It was
been my pleasure and an honor.
This podcast was brought to you by PUR-FORM, a comprehensive wellness center in Boca Raton, Florida. Our website is pureformhealth.com, where you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at PUR-FORM Health, spelled PURFORM Health. Feel free to message us with any questions, and note that you can connect with our providers for consultations over Zoom for everything from stem cell therapy to hormone replacement therapy and peptide therapy. That's it for this episode of the Healthspan Collective. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. We'd also love to connect with you on Instagram. Follow the podcast at Healthspan Collective, me at Nicole J. Doran, and our wellness center at PUR-FORM Health. Feel free to message us with any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes.